Maya? God, what the hell happened? Someone call an ambulance. She's not breathing, and Logan's unconscious. The words shot through the nursery like a bullet. Blake Harrington, still in his tailored Navy suit from the board meeting he'd left early, stood frozen for a split second before sprinting across the polished oak floor. A half-used bottle of baby formula rolled beneath the crib, and on the floor, Maya Williams, his housemaid, lay sprawled. Unconscious, her arm curled protectively around his son, 2-year-old Logan, who whimpered weakly, drenched in sweat. But what Blake didn't know was this. Only minutes earlier, Logan had suffered a violent febrile seizure. Maya had heard the strange choking cry while scrubbing the laundry sink downstairs. She dropped the towel in her hand and raced up the forbidden stairs without thinking. In the nursery, she'd found Logan convulsing, tiny limbs stiff, his eyes fluttering and unfocused, his skin burned to the touch. "Sweetheart, stay with me," she had whispered, grabbing the damp cloth from the shelf, cradling his burning body against hers. Her hands shook as she cooled his forehead, stroked his cheeks, whispered his name over and over like a prayer. The nannies were gone. No one answered her calls. And then something cold. A sharp sting at the back of her neck. A scent chemical, bitter, artificial. She'd barely turned her head before everything blurred. Her limbs went limp. Her chest tightened. The nursery lights spun above her like carousel bulbs. As darkness swallowed her, the last thing she heard was Logan's tiny cry against her collarbone. Now, as Blake knelt beside them, he didn't see any of that. "Logan, no, breathe, son. Stay with me." Blake's voice cracked. He turned to Maya, his chest heaving. She didn't move. A beat later, Gilda Crane, the housekeeper, ran into the room, feigning panic, hand over her chest. "Oh my lord," she gasped. "Mr. Harrington. I was just downstairs getting fresh diapers. I came back and found them like this. She must have done something. That bottle, it's open. And there's medicine on the floor." Blake's eyes darted to the nursery table. A small bottle lay uncapped, its contents spilled across the floor. His heart pounded faster, but something wasn't right. Logan's cries slowed, his limbs trembled. Blake held him tighter, shouting over his shoulder, "Call an ambulance, now!" As Gilda disappeared, Blake shifted Maya slightly, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint, sluggish. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. What the hell happened? He looked around again. Logan had clearly been sick. A small bowl of water sat beside the crib, along with a towel soaked in lukewarm water. There was even a thermometer on the floor, still blinking. Maya had been cooling him down. But then, how had she passed out? Blake didn't notice the faint scent of something sharp lingering in the air, like alcohol mixed with citrus. He didn't see the faint red mark on Maya's wrist where a small injection had bruised the skin too clean to be accidental. What he saw was a terrifying scene. His son nearly seizing, and the maid unconscious on the nursery floor. Wait, before we continue, if this story touched your heart, please hit subscribe. It truly encourages us to bring you more powerful stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know our amazing viewers around the world. With no explanation, the paramedics arrived swiftly. One crouched by Logan, another by Maya. "Baby's running a dangerously high fever," one EMT murmured. "We need to stabilize his temperature. It could have led to a seizure." Blake's fists clenched. He looked back at Maya as the other medic checked her vitals. "Severe dehydration," the medic said. "Possibly drugged. Maybe passed out from exhaustion or low blood sugar. But we'll need tests." "Drugged?" Blake echoed sharply. "She smells like sedatives," the EMT added quietly. "Could be accidental. Could be administered. We won't know until the tox screen comes back." That was the moment it snapped. Blake stood, fists clenched at his sides. His jaw tightened as he turned toward Maya's unconscious figure. Fury boiling inside him. "She drugged herself in my son's room?" His voice cracked, but no one answered. When Maya stirred minutes later, barely able to open her eyes, her head spun. Her body was heavy. She tried to speak, but the words died on her lips. Blake stepped forward, his shadow falling over her like a curtain. "What did you do to him?" he shouted, his voice laced with fury and panic. Maya blinked, struggling to sit up. He had a fever. He started shaking. "Don't lie to me," Blake roared. "Don't you dare. You had no business being in here. You touched my son. You poisoned him, and now you're going to play the victim?" "I didn't, I swear I was trying to help." "Shut up." He moved so suddenly she flinched. In his rage, his hand jerked forward, not a slap, not a punch, but as he reached to yank her up by the arm, his grip was too hard. Her head knocked sharply against the wooden bedpost behind her with a thud. She gasped in pain. "Don't pretend to care," he growled. "I should have listened when they said to keep you away." The medics pulled him back. "Sir, please, she's still unconscious. She needs medical attention." "When?" Maya closed her eyes, pain radiating from the side of her head. But what hurt more was his voice. She had admired him from afar. This grieving father, this broken man trying to raise his son alone. And now he stood over her, treating her like nothing. Gilda reappeared, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "I warned you about her," she whispered to Blake. "People like her, they pretend. Always looking for sympathy. You saw the bottle. The ambulance lights flashed red and blue outside. Maya was lifted onto a stretcher, her limp hand brushing against Logan's blanket. The boy cried softly. Maya turned her face toward the sound, eyes wet. "I didn't hurt him," she whispered. Blake didn't respond. At the hospital, Maya was placed in a separate ward under observation. Logan was stabilized, fever brought down with fluids and medication. Hours later, the pediatrician met Blake in the hallway. "Your son's going to be okay," she said softly. "But I have to ask who's been caring for him lately." Blake blinked. "The nanny. Gilda oversees it." The doctor hesitated. "He shows signs of emotional withdrawal. No bonding. Little response to stimuli. That doesn't happen overnight." Blake said nothing. He was still thinking of the way Logan had clung to Maya's shirt, even unconscious. The next morning, Maya woke to find herself alone in the sterile hospital room. Her wrist was bruised, her head still pounding. She turned slowly, eyes burning. No one came. No one believed her. In the silence, a single word fell from her lips like a prayer torn from the heart. "Logan, if you felt Maya's pain, hit like and comment where you're watching from. You might find someone near you feeling the same." She turned her head slowly, wincing at the soreness in her neck. A thin bandage wrapped around her temple where she'd hit the bedpost the night before. Her wrist was bruised. Her pride shattered. She reached for the call button, not because she needed help, but just to prove she could still move her hand. The nurse entered a minute later, a middle-aged woman with a kind but tired face. "You're awake," she said gently, checking the IV. "How are you feeling?" Maya hesitated. "I'm still trying to figure out if this is real." The nurse gave her a sympathetic glance. "You passed out from exhaustion. That and, well, whatever someone injected you with." Maya blinked. "Injected?" The nurse nodded. "Small puncture in your wrist. Trace amounts of a sedative were found in your system. Nothing over the counter." Maya's heart dropped. Someone had drugged her. That meant this wasn't just an accident. Someone wanted her out of that room. "Do you know who?" Maya whispered. The nurse looked hesitant. "They didn't say, but the police weren't called. Mr. Harrington's private team handled everything." "Of course they did." Maya bit the inside of her cheek, keeping the tears back. "Your clothes were sent back to your agency," the nurse added. "And someone from the Harrington estate dropped off your final check. It's already processed." "Already?" Maya asked, startled. The nurse paused. "I think they want this to be over." The words landed hard, like a verdict. Later that morning, Maya was discharged with little ceremony. No one from the Harrington household came. No driver, no explanation, just silence. She walked out of the hospital in the same clothes she'd worn 2 nights before, now wrinkled and still faintly smelling of baby powder and antiseptic. The taxi she flagged down took her back to her tiny studio apartment on the edge of Queens. The heater groaned when she stepped inside, and the single-pane windows rattled in the wind. Her mother, Lorraine, was sitting in the kitchen, knitting a faded scarf with fingers that trembled slightly. Her eyes lit up when she saw Maya, but that smile faltered as she took in her daughter's injuries. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "What did they do to you?" Maya didn't answer. She sank into the chair across from her mother and let her bag slide to the floor. The check they gave her was still folded in the back pocket of her jeans. Blood money. She stared at the wall, where a faded photo of her younger brother, Marcus, still hung. He'd been in the Navy before the accident. The hospital bills were why she had taken the job in the first place. Working for one of the richest men in the Northeast was supposed to mean security. But in that house, even compassion was a risk. "I tried to help his son," Maya finally said. "He had a fever. He was shaking. No one was there." If you're still here and enjoying the story, we'd love your support. Take a second to hit subscribe. It really means a lot. Lorraine reached across the table, placing a hand over Maya's bruised fingers. Sometimes the right thing costs more than we expect. Doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing. That night, Maya lay awake on her creaky mattress, listening to the city buzz outside, honking horns, distant voices. Her mind kept drifting back to Logan, his red cheeks, the way his tiny hand had gripped her shirt, even while he was unconscious. He had looked for her. Chosen her. She closed her eyes and whispered his name again. Logan. Across town, in a mansion too large for one man and a baby, Blake Harrington sat at his desk, unable to focus on the investment reports blinking on his screen. Logan was finally asleep upstairs, but only after 2 nurses tried for hours to calm him. He hadn't eaten, he hadn't spoken. He just lay there, silent, staring at the ceiling. Blake pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to push away the image that haunted him. Logan, cradled in Maya's arms, flushed with fever, but calmer than he'd ever been with any of the staff. "You didn't belong there," he muttered to the empty room, but the words rang hollow. A knock came at his door. Gilda entered, her expression composed. "The staff has been rebriefed," she said, "and the agency confirmed Maya won't be returning to the roster. They're investigating her." Blake looked up. "Investigating? She may have falsified medical experience," Gilda said, folding her hands. "She was seen in the nursery multiple times without authorization." Blake's lips pressed into a line. He should have felt justified, but instead, a strange guilt gnawed at his chest. "Mr. Harrington," Gilda continued, "you need stability. Structure." She wasn't part of that. He dismissed her with a nod. After she left, he sat back in his chair, rubbing his temple. Structure, that's all his house had become: stone walls and silence. Since Gabrielle's death, the mansion had become a mausoleum. And now, the only person who had ever sung in its halls, however briefly, was gone. Back in Queens, Maya sat by the window, watching a light drizzle coat the glass. She sipped weak tea. Her fingers curled around the warm mug. Her mother had gone to sleep hours ago, the scarf still half finished in her lap. In the dim reflection, Maya saw her own face, tired, bruised, but not broken. She whispered softly, to no one in particular, "I didn't hurt him. I saved him." Her voice was barely louder than the rain, but steady. The world could believe what it wanted. But she knew the truth. She just didn't know what to do with it yet. The following morning, Logan sat curled in a ball on the oversized rocking chair near the window, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. The nurse tried coaxing him with a rattle, then with a spoonful of applesauce, then with the usual sing-song voice that had worked with so many other children. Nothing. His face was expressionless. His eyes didn't track the motion of the toy, nor did he react to the gentle strokes of her hand across his hair. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was simply distant. Blake stood just outside the room, watching from the doorway, his arms crossed, his knuckles white against the fabric of his suit. The therapist doctor, Naomi Ellis, a child development specialist from Columbia, arrived at precisely 9 a.m. She was in her early 50s, a calm presence with silver-threaded hair tied into a low bun and eyes that read a room before anyone spoke a word. She didn't approach Logan immediately. She crouched on the floor several feet away and waited, folding her hands in her lap. "He hasn't spoken since the fever broke," the nurse whispered to her. "No appetite, No vocalizations, not even eye contact. Dr. Ellis gave a single nod and quietly gestured for everyone else to step out. Blake hesitated. "I'd prefer to observe," he said. "With respect, Mr. Harrington," she replied gently but firmly. "Sometimes a parent's presence reinforces silence." Her words cut deeper than he expected. He stepped back. Downstairs, the grand foyer sat empty except for the soft ticking of the antique grandfather clock. Blake wandered into the kitchen, where Gilda was arranging a tray of freshly cut fruit and pastries. "He's not responding," he said, voice low. "They said he's emotionally detached." Gilda set a cup of tea beside him. "It'll pass. He's sensitive, that's all. He just needs time. Routine. Familiarity." Blake stared into the cup. He wasn't like this before. Gilda offered a thin smile. "Children his age go through phases, you'll see." But her voice lacked conviction. Blake didn't drink the tea. Upstairs, Dr. Ellis spoke in soft tones. She didn't push Logan, didn't make demands. Instead, she sat beside him with a toy piano on the rug, gently tapping out the notes to "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." She watched his eyes flicker. Just slightly, but that flicker gave her something Gilda hadn't: truth. When she stepped out of the nursery an hour later, she found Blake pacing the hall. "He's not unreachable," she began, "but he's emotionally fractured. Not just from the fever. This has been happening for a while." Blake rubbed his neck, tension crawling up his shoulders. "He lost his mother at birth." "I know," Dr. Ellis said softly. "But grief isn't the only thing that isolates a child. Logan doesn't seem to associate safety with anyone around him." Blake looked away. "Dr. Ellis continued. "He did respond slightly to a song. His eyes moved, briefly, when I played it." Blake frowned. "What song?" She smiled faintly. "An old lullaby. One I heard a nurse humming on the baby monitor footage just before your son's fever episode." Blake's eyes darkened. He knew what footage she was talking about. The baby monitor had been recording. Gilda had said the footage was lost during a system reset. Dr. Ellis handed him a small USB drive. "I took the liberty of requesting a copy from your network backup. I thought you might want to watch." She didn't wait for a response. She simply patted his arm and left. Blake stared at the small device in his hand for a long moment. Then he walked back into his study, shut the door, and plugged it into his computer. The footage wasn't sharp, but it didn't need to be. There was Logan, curled in his crib, whimpering softly. And there was Maya, entering the room quietly. Not sneaking, not nervous, just gentle, intentional. She picked up the child, cradled him close, and began humming, her voice faint but warm. She cooled his forehead, whispered reassurances, and held him until his cries softened. Then, something Blake hadn't noticed the first time: movement behind her. A figure, Gilda. She stood in the hallway for a moment, watching, then disappeared. Seconds later, Maya's body jerked. Her hands trembled. She stumbled slightly and leaned against the crib. Then she collapsed to the floor, still clutching Logan tightly to her chest. Blake hit pause. The room spun. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He remembered the bruises on Maya's wrist, the nurse mentioning an injection site, the scent of something sharp in the nursery, the EMT whispering, possibly drugged. And all at once, the pieces slid into place. "Oh my God," Blake whispered. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood. He walked to the fireplace and pressed a hand against the mantel, trying to steady himself. He had hurt her, not just physically. He had humiliated her, called her a liar, accused her of harming his son. And all she'd done was protect Logan, comfort him, save him. Downstairs, Gilda passed by the doorway with a stack of clean towels. She paused when she saw him. "Is something wrong?" she asked smoothly. Blake turned, slowly, his expression unreadable. "No," he said, "not yet." That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat beside Logan's crib in the dark, watching his son breathe. The little boy clutched the edge of his blanket, twitching slightly in his dreams. Blake reached over and gently placed a hand on his back. "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." And for the first time in weeks, Logan stirred and made a small sound, a soft sigh, like the end of a held breath. It was the sound of a child still waiting to be held. The following day dawned cold and gray, rain smearing the windows of Maya's tiny apartment like watercolor tears. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a warm mug of chamomile tea between her palms, the steam rising gently toward her bruised face. Her mother, Lorraine, was still asleep in the adjoining room, her cough faint but persistent. Maya hadn't told her about everything that happened, not the way Blake Harrington had shouted at her, not the sharp knock of her skull against the wooden crib post, not the way it felt to be carried out like trash, no questions asked, no truth heard. She had tried to be strong for Lorraine. But now, sitting in silence, her strength felt thin as the threadbare quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Her phone buzzed quietly on the nightstand. She picked it up. Unknown number. She stared at it for a moment. Her fingers hovered, heart unsure. But curiosity overruled her pain. "Hello?" she said, her voice still hoarse. A pause. Then a low, cautious voice replied, "Miss Williams, this is Dr. Naomi Ellis. I'm a child therapist, currently working with Logan Harrington." Maya's breath caught. Is he okay? He's stable, but he's not responding. Withdrawn, emotionally shut down. Maya closed her eyes, the memory of Logan's small, fevered body in her arms pressing hard on her chest. "I know you've been through something traumatic, Doctor," Ellis continued, "and I wasn't sure if calling you was appropriate. But I reviewed some footage. I know what happened." Maya sat straighter. "What do you mean?" "I saw you care for Logan. I saw Gilda Crane standing outside the room before you collapsed." Silence. "I believe someone drugged you, Maya," Dr. Ellis said softly. "And I believe Mr. Harrington does too now." The words hit harder than Maya expected. Blake knew? After all that venom, all that mistrust he knew? "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because the truth needs a voice. And because Logan hasn't smiled since you left." The call ended shortly after, but Maya didn't move for a long time. Her tea had gone cold in her hands. She sat motionless, staring at the dripping window pane. Outside, the city moved on buses grumbling past, neighbors calling to each other, the smell of rain on warm concrete. But inside her, something had shifted. Not hope, not yet, but something close to it. Across town, Blake stood in the nursery doorway, watching Logan play listlessly with a stuffed elephant. The boy's shoulders slumped as he nudged the toy without focus. No sound. No smile. The grief inside Blake was sharper now, not just the old pain of losing Gabrielle, but the new ache of betrayal. Not by Maya, but by himself. He had let his fear blind him. Again, he turned away from the nursery and headed downstairs. He found Gilda in the parlor, folding linens at the side table. "Can I speak to you?" he asked, voice calm but brittle. "Of course," she said sweetly. "Is everything all right?" "I reviewed the security footage," he said plainly. Her hands stopped moving. "I saw you outside the nursery," he continued. "I saw you leave. And then Maya collapses. A few minutes after you re-enter the house, with no explanation." Gilda's face didn't change. "Coincidence," she said. "She was clearly unstable. You saw how she behaved. I also saw Logan reach for her. I saw her lower his fever. I saw kindness. What I didn't see was threat." Gilda's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're trusting a maid over someone who served your family for years?" "I'm trusting the truth," Blake replied coldly. She dropped the linen onto the chair beside her. "You don't know what she's capable of." "No," he said, stepping closer. "But I know what you are. You're fired, Gilda, effective immediately. I've sent the footage to my lawyers and to the police." She laughed, but it was hollow. "You'll regret this. She'll ruin you. She already saved my son." With that, he turned and left her standing in the stillness of the parlor, surrounded by folded towels and silence. The door slammed shut behind him. Later that afternoon, Maya opened her apartment door to find a courier standing there with an envelope in hand. She signed for it, puzzled, then closed the door and carefully opened the seal. Inside, a letter, typed, formal, but the last paragraph made her hand tremble. "I was wrong, deeply, unforgivably wrong. And I know it's not enough, but I'm asking not as your former employer, but as a father if you'll consider returning, not as help, but as Logan's caregiver, with full rights, full protection, and my complete trust. Signed, Blake Harrington. Below the letter was a business card and a handwritten note. He misses you. We both do. Maya stared at the page for a long time. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Part of her wanted to tear it in half. Another part wanted to run. But a quiet, stubborn part, the part that had wrapped a trembling baby in her arms and hummed lullabies through exhaustion, held the letter close and whispered, "This isn't over." That night, Logan stirred in his crib. Blake sat beside him, as he often did now, watching the rise and fall of his chest. But something was different. The little boy reached toward the air, as if grasping for something that wasn't there. Then he whispered, barely audible, Maya." Blake's breath caught, and in a neighborhood apartment far from marble floors and silk curtains, Maya felt something stir inside her too. The next morning brought rain again, gentler this time, steady and whispering like a lullaby across the rooftops of Queens. Maya stood in front of the cracked mirror above her sink, smoothing the front of her blouse with shaking hands. She hadn't worn this shirt in weeks. It still smelled faintly of baby powder and lemon cleaner. The letter from Blake Harrington lay folded neatly on the nightstand. She'd read it 6 times the night before, not out of disbelief, but out of fear that it might disappear if she blinked too long. Behind her, her mother's voice echoed faintly from the other room. "You're going, aren't you?" Maya turned slightly. "I haven't decided." Lorraine stepped into the small kitchen space, pulling her robe tighter around her frail frame. "Yes, you have. You wouldn't be wearing your Sunday blouse if you hadn't." Maya let out a quiet breath. What if he's just trying to clear his conscience? What if he doesn't really mean it? "Then go for the child," Lorraine said. "Not for him." Maya looked down, tears stinging her eyes. "Logan called my name," she whispered. "Dr. Ellis said. He reached for me. I don't know how that's even possible, because babies know who holds them when they're scared," Lorraine said gently. "And they never forget who shows up when nobody else does." Later that afternoon, Maya stood at the edge of the Harrington estate's long driveway, her umbrella trembling in the wind. The wrought iron gates loomed tall ahead of her, slick with rain and memory. Her shoes, once polished, were now scuffed from the subway and the wet sidewalks. She clutched her worn leather purse tighter to her side and pressed the intercom button. A familiar voice answered. "This is Harrington Residence." "It's Maya Williams," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mr. Harrington sent me a letter." There was a pause. Then the gates opened slowly with a groan, as if the house itself was uncertain whether to welcome her back. Maya walked the long stone path lined with soaked rose bushes and trimmed hedges, every step echoing with the ghost of her last visit, the shouting, the fear, the crash of her body hitting the floor. But this time, when the front door opened, it wasn't a servant or an assistant standing there. It was Blake. He stood in a gray sweater and slacks, no suit, no tie, his sleeves rolled up. His face looked thinner, his eyes tired but clear. "Maya," he said softly. She nodded. "You asked me to come." "I did," he replied. "I wasn't sure if you would." Maya stepped inside slowly, her heels tapping gently on the marble floor. The house was still the same, clean, grand, cold, but something felt different. Not warmer, exactly. Just quieter, waiting. "I cleared the staff for the afternoon," Blake said, closing the door behind her. "Just you, me, and Logan." Maya turned to face him fully. "Why now?" Blake's jaw clenched. "Because I saw everything. What you did for my son. What she did to you." "Gilda," Maya said. He nodded. "She's gone. Fired. And I've opened a police investigation." Maya crossed her arms. "And what about me? You accused me of poisoning your son. You grabbed me. You didn't even let me speak." His eyes dropped. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me for that. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least give you the chance to speak now." Maya was silent for a moment. Then she said quietly, "He had a fever. His body was shaking. No one came. I wiped him down, held him, sang to him, and then everything went black." "I know," Blake said, voice rough. "She drugged you. We found traces in the towel she planted. She wanted you gone. Maybe because she saw what I didn't, that you mattered to Logan in a way no one else did. Maya's lips trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. Where is he? She asked. Blake gestured toward the nursery upstairs. He's been quiet again. We've tried. But he barely responds to anyone. Not since you left. Maya hesitated, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. Then, without another word, she headed for the stairs. Each step echoed like a heartbeat in the still house. At the top, she paused outside the nursery door. Her hand hovered above the knob. Then she heard it, a faint, broken whimper. She pushed the door open. Logan sat curled in the corner of his crib, his face turned toward the window. His stuffed elephant lay beside him, untouched. The moment Maya stepped into the room, his head turned. His eyes met hers. For a beat, nothing happened. Then, like a single thread pulling loose from a tapestry, he reached out. Maya, one. Her hand flew to her mouth. A sound escaped her throat. Part gasp, part sob. She rushed to the crib, kneeling beside it, hands trembling as she touched his fingers. I'm here, sweetheart, she whispered. I'm here now. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers, his tiny hand resting on her cheek. Downstairs, Blake watched the baby monitor screen in stunned silence. For the first time in days, Logan smiled. Just a little, but enough. Later that evening, Maya sat in the rocking chair with Logan curled against her chest, asleep, breathing steady. Blake entered quietly, standing at the doorway. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Maya looked up at him. I'm not coming back as help, she said softly. Not without boundaries. Not without respect. Blake nodded. You're not help. You're home. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the Harrington estate bathed in a strange hush, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Sunlight filtered through the nursery curtains in soft golden stripes, casting a glow over Logan's crib and the quiet silhouette of Maya as she gently rocked him in her arms. He had fallen asleep again sometime around dawn, one tiny hand tangled in the collar of her blouse, his head tucked against the familiar curve of her shoulder. Maya had barely moved for hours, afraid that even the slightest shift might wake him, or worse, break the delicate peace she had only just restored. Blake stood at the threshold of the room, watching from a respectful distance. I can bring you coffee, he said, voice low. Maya looked up slowly, tired but calm. Not yet. He nodded and stepped back, retreating silently like a man aware that forgiveness, if it ever came, would be earned in inches, not leaps. Later, after Logan had been tucked back into bed and the household began to stir, Maya sat at the long oak dining table downstairs, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee. The room, like the rest of the mansion, was immaculate white stone counters, stainless steel fixtures, not a dish out of place. But beneath the shine, Maya could feel it, the weight of emptiness. The kind that no money could clean. Blake joined her, placing a folder on the table. His sleeves were rolled up again, and a faint shadow lined his jaw, signs of a man finally too distracted to shave. I drew up a contract, he said. Full rights. You'll be Logan's primary caregiver. Salary doubled. Medical, dental, private transportation if needed. I also included a clause that protects your decisions regarding his emotional well-being. Maya opened the folder slowly. The legal language was dense but clear. Boundaries, security, a measure of trust on paper, even if the one between them in person was still fragile. No live-in requirement, she murmured. I appreciate that. Blake nodded. You'll have access to your own schedule. No contact with household staff unless you choose to coordinate. And if anything makes you feel unsafe, you walk. No explanation needed. Maya closed the folder and set it gently aside. Why are you going to all this trouble? She asked, not unkindly. Is this guilt talking, or is this about Logan? Blake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Both. Maya waited. I don't know how to be what Logan needs, he said finally. And I don't know how to fix what I broke with you. But I know what I saw. He smiled when he saw you. The first real smile I've seen since he was born. Maya looked down at her mug. I'm not his mother, she said. No, Blake agreed. But you're someone who shows up, and that matters more than you know. Har. A beat of silence passed. Outside, a robin landed on the windowsill, chirping into the quiet. I'll take the position, Maya said, her voice steady. But I have conditions too. Blake raised an eyebrow. Let's hear them. First, I don't want to be called the help or treated like it. I'm here for Logan, not to serve your dinner or iron your shirts. Understood. Second, she continued, I want full access to the baby monitor footage moving forward. No blind spots, no erasing tapes. Oh, you'll have it. And third, she said, her tone softening just slightly, you owe me an apology. A real one. Not for paperwork. For me. Blake leaned back in his chair, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't flinch. I'm sorry, Maya. I failed you. I let fear blind me. And I let someone I trusted hurt you. I doubted your heart. And that's not something I can undo. But I promise you this, I'll never doubt it again. Maya didn't smile, but she nodded. That's a start. That afternoon, Logan took his first nap in days without needing sedation. Maya lay beside him on a soft mat, humming the same lullaby she had once whispered in the dark, her voice barely audible over the quiet tick of the wall clock. Blake watched from the hallway, unseen. He could hear her singing, Sleep, little one, the night is here. The melody stirred something in him, something old and fragile. He thought of Gabrielle then, the way she used to hum while reading, the faint scent of her shampoo in the morning. She had died bringing Logan into the world. And since that day, Blake had tried to hold everything together through silence and order. But maybe silence wasn't the answer. Maybe love didn't live in rules and routines but in lullabies and borrowed strength. That evening, Blake knocked gently on Maya's door, the guest suite they'd set up for her now. She opened it, surprised to see him standing there with 2 mugs of tea. Chamomile, he said, holding one out to her. I remember you liked it. Maya took it slowly. Thank you. They sat by the window in silence for a while, watching the clouds roll past the moon. I'm not good at this, Blake admitted. The emotions, the parenting, the humility. You don't have to be good at it, Maya replied. You just have to be honest about where you are. He looked at her then, really looked, not as a maid, not as an employee, but as a woman who had stood between his son and harm, even while being harmed herself. I'm trying, he said. Maya nodded. So am I. In the nursery, Logan slept peacefully, one tiny hand curled around the ear of his stuffed elephant, and somewhere between guilt and healing, silence and song, something new began to bloom. Sunday morning crept in gently, wrapping the Harrington estate in warm light and still air. The rain had cleared, leaving the stone driveway slick with sunlight. Birds chirped in the hedges, and the scent of blooming gardenias drifted in through open windows. Down in the kitchen, Maya was flipping waffles on the cast-iron griddle. She wore an apron too large for her, tied twice at the back, and her curls were tucked under a soft head wrap. Logan sat in a booster seat beside the counter, banging a plastic spoon on the tray while babbling something only Maya seemed to understand. She smiled, turning to wipe a dab of syrup from his chin. That's a big opinion for someone with no teeth, mister. Logan giggled a small round giggle that caught Blake by surprise as he stood in the doorway. He hadn't heard his son laugh like that since before the fever. Since before everything fell apart. He took a slow step into the room. Maya noticed him and gestured to the plate already set on the island bar. Waffles, she said. No silver spoon required. No. He walked over, glancing at the golden stack. Didn't know you cooked. You didn't ask, she replied, then looked back to Logan. Besides, someone needs to make sure this kid eats real food. Blake sat on the stool, trying to suppress a smile. You always this bossy before breakfast? Only with billionaires and babies. They shared a look still cautious, but with the faintest trace of something warmer. Logan reached out to Maya again, and she lifted him into her lap, letting him rest his head against her shoulder as she continued eating with one hand. You make it look easy, Blake said softly. It's not, she replied. It's just love. The words hung in the air like a benediction. Later that day, while Logan napped, Maya wandered through the west wing of the estate. She hadn't had much time to explore when she was still the help, but now she walked with a little more ownership in her step. She passed family portraits Blake, as a child in a blazer too big for him. A stiff-looking man in uniform. His father, maybe. And finally, A framed photo of Blake and a woman in a flowing sundress, her eyes almond-shaped and bright, arms wrapped around her swollen belly. Gabrielle. Maya studied the picture for a long time, her hand resting lightly on the wall beneath it. The woman's smile was open, joyful. She looked nothing like the mansion around her. She looked like sunlight. She hated this house. Blake's voice came quietly from behind. Maya turned. She said it was too quiet. He continued, stepping up beside her. Too cold. But I insisted. Said it was secure. Safe. Logical. She looks happy in the photo, Maya offered gently. She smiled for me, Blake replied, even when she was scared, even when the doctors said she wouldn't make it through childbirth. Maya's eyes lowered. You stayed in this house after she passed? She asked. I didn't know how to leave, Blake admitted. Logan was all I had left, and I thought if I controlled everything, his food, his toys, his world, then I could keep him safe. But control isn't safety, Maya said. It's a cage. He looked at her, surprised by the clarity of her words. But she wasn't done. You can't parent from fear, Blake. I know fear. I've lived with it. It eats you from the inside. But kids, especially kids like Logan, they need trust more than perfection. They need presence. Even messy, uncertain presence. Blake didn't speak, but he nodded. That evening, Maya sat with Logan on the rug in the living room. They stacked wooden blocks one by one until the tower swayed dangerously high. Then Logan, grinning, knocked them over with a triumphant squeal. Chaos, huh? Maya said, tousling his hair. You're your father's son after all. Blake watched from the couch, half a glass of wine in his hand, his eyes soft. He hadn't seen Logan this engaged in, ever. When the clock struck 7, Maya stood. I should get going. Wait, Blake said quickly. Do you have to? She turned to him. I mean, he stammered, you're not on duty. But I was hoping you'd stay. For dinner. Not for Logan. For me. Maya tilted her head. Are you asking me out, Mr. Harrington? He raised an eyebrow. I'm asking if you'd like grilled salmon, roasted potatoes, and the worst bottle of wine in my collection. She pretended to consider. The wine sounds terrible. It is, she smirked. All right, but only if Logan gets dessert first. Deal. They moved to the dining room, a space Maya had never entered before. It was massive, filled with expensive art and untouched china, but tonight it felt different. Blake had set the table himself, one candle flickering in the center, Logan's plastic plate sitting proudly next to the fine silver. Halfway through the meal, Maya glanced toward the baby monitor clipped to her belt. Logan was asleep, peaceful again. Blake reached for his wine glass, swirling it without sipping. Do you think he'll remember any of this? Maya looked at him. He won't remember the fear. Kids don't hold on to pain the same way we do. But he'll remember love, warmth, and who came back when no one else did. Blake exhaled. You came back. Maya's voice was soft but steady. I didn't come back for you. He smiled faintly. I know, but I'm grateful all the same. In the silence that followed, the clink of cutlery and the hum of quiet jazz on the radio wove together into something almost holy. A billionaire, a black woman once falsely accused, and a little boy who smiled in his sleep for the first time in weeks. They weren't a family, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, they were becoming one. The following week settled into something resembling rhythm. Not routine. Blake had learned the hard way that nothing about parenting followed a perfect schedule, but there was a gentler flow now. Mornings began with Maya's calm voice and Logan's small footsteps pattering down the hallway. Breakfast no longer echoed with silence, but with the clatter of spoons, the soft rustle of newspapers, and the occasional fit of giggles from the high chair. Blake often found himself lingering near the kitchen just to listen. But with peace came questions, and Blake had many. One afternoon, while Logan napped and Maya read beside the nursery window, Blake walked into the study with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in weeks. He opened his laptop, navigated to the encrypted files recovered from his home's security system, and reviewed the footage again. There Gilda, standing outside Logan's room. She had paused for exactly 38 seconds. Her hand moved inside her apron. When she stepped away, Maya stumbled, then collapsed. He paused the frame and leaned in. The glint of a syringe. Blake leaned back, jaw clenched. The case was already under police review, but the wheels of justice turned slowly. And something inside him, it wasn't satisfied with just reporting. He needed to understand why. Why would Gilda, the woman who'd served his family since he was a teenager, do this? So he went digging. The Harrington Foundation's HR archives were buried under layers of digital bureaucracy, but Blake still held admin access. He found Gilda's old personnel files, scanned emails, and a curious flag from the previous year. Concern raised by employee regarding caregiver hostility. The report had been closed. No investigation. No names. He pulled up another file, notes from an old household employee, dismissed 6 months before Maya was hired. Termination reason: unfit temperament, unwilling to follow chain of command. Blake frowned. He searched the name Rosalind Tate and found an old address in East Harlem. That evening, after Maya left and Logan had gone to bed, Blake made the drive. The neighborhood was tight and aging, filled with brownstones and corner bodegas. A woman in her early 50s answered the door, wearing a stained hoodie and the kind of guarded look that came from years of being overlooked. "Rosalind Tate?" Blake asked. She blinked, surprised. "You the cop?" He shook his head. "I'm Blake Harrington." Her eyes narrowed. "The billionaire? The one with the baby?" He nodded. "I need to ask you about Gilda Crane." Rosalind stepped outside, arms crossed. "Took you long enough." Blake was taken aback. "You knew?" "I knew she was a snake the day she poured bleach in the laundry bin to get rid of the Latina maid," Rosalind said. "But nobody listened. We were just the staff. She ran that house like a queen and made sure anyone she didn't like didn't last." Blake felt his stomach twist. "She hated women like Maya," Rosalind continued. "Smart. Black. Good with the kid. Gilda couldn't stand it. Especially after the boy started reaching for Maya instead of her. She poisoned Maya," Blake said. "I'm not surprised." They stood in silence for a moment, the chill of the night creeping into their bones. "You got a good one," Rosalind added, softening. "Don't let your guilt drown her. She's stronger than you think, but even strong women break if they're left cleaning up messes they didn't make." Blake nodded, thanked her, and drove home in silence. The next morning, Maya arrived earlier than usual. She carried a small basket of fresh muffins she'd baked that morning, banana walnut, Logan's favorite. When she walked in, she noticed something new in the air. Blake had rearranged the nursery. The stiff, sterile lines were gone. The cold blue-gray walls had been softened with pastel art prints. There was now a second rocking chair by the crib, a low shelf of sensory toys, a tiny record player in the corner with a few children's vinyls. She turned slowly, touched by the effort. "Did you hire a designer?" she teased. Blake stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "No, I just listened to you." Maya smiled gently. "He'll like this." "I was thinking," Blake added, "about everything. About Gilda, about you, and Logan." He stepped inside, holding a printed page. "I'm withdrawing from the civil case," he said. "The police are handling the criminal side, but I'm also donating to a domestic care advocacy fund, one that supports Black women working in white-majority households. It'll be named after someone who made me see clearer." Maya took the paper. Her name was at the top, the Maya Williams Fellowship for Domestic Justice. She didn't speak for a moment. "Then, that's a start." Blake smiled faintly. "We're getting good at starts." Later that afternoon, Logan took his first unassisted step. It was wobbly, barely more than a shuffle. But Maya gasped, dropped to her knees, and cheered like he'd won the Boston Marathon. Logan beamed. Blake watched from the hallway, heart pounding in a way that surprised him. Not from fear, but from awe. He had missed so many firsts. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to miss the rest. That night, as Maya prepared to leave, Blake walked her to the door. "There's something else I haven't told you," he said. Maya turned, curious. "I know who reported you, back when you were working at West Point Medical." Maya froze. "That file was sealed." "I unsealed it." She stepped back. "Why?" "Because I wanted the truth. Not for leverage, for healing." Maya's throat tightened. "And what did you find?" Blake met her eyes. "You were protecting a patient, not harming them." "Oh." Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden. They made it look like I crossed a line. I know. And I'm sorry they did. It ends here. Maya nodded, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. She didn't hug him. She didn't need to. Sometimes justice didn't come with applause or headlines. Sometimes it came in the quiet honesty of a changed man. It was a Thursday evening when the past came knocking quietly, politely, with no warning at all. The sky outside the Harrington estate was streaked in amber and lavender as the sun slipped behind the trees. Inside, Logan was asleep early, worn out from a day full of laughter, finger painting, and a visit to the botanical gardens. Maya had taken dozens of pictures on her phone, Logan squatting beside a lily, his tiny hands muddy, his mouth open in awe. She sat now in the study, scrolling through them, smiling without realizing it. Blake was nearby, sorting through documents and sipping a rare glass of whiskey. A comfortable silence lingered between them, interrupted only by the soft ticking of the antique clock and the occasional creak of old floorboards settling. Then the doorbell rang. Maya looked up. Expecting someone? Blake frowned. No. He rose, and she followed him into the entry hall. The cameras had already lit up on the security screen by the door. A woman stood outside, middle-aged, sharp-suited, her expression unreadable. Blake opened the door, cautious. "Mr. Harrington?" she asked, with the clipped tone of someone used to command. "That's me." She extended a badge. "Detective Carol Winters, NYPD. May I come in?" Blake hesitated, then stepped aside. Maya lingered by the stairs, watching, heart quickening. "I'm following up on the Gilda Crane case," Winters said, stepping inside and scanning the opulence with disinterest. "Specifically, new statements from a witness." "Rosalind Tate?" Blake asked. "Yes. Her deposition helped us move the investigation forward," Winters confirmed. "But something else came up. Something that needs your attention." Maya stepped forward slightly. "What kind of something?" Winters glanced at her, then back at Blake. "It's about Logan's birth." The room seemed to still. Blake's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Winters reached into her briefcase and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. "Do you mind if we sit?" They gathered in the parlor, Maya, Blake, and the detective seated in stiff leather chairs. Winters slid the envelope across the table. "This contains a report we obtained from West Point Medical where your son was born. We've matched signatures, timestamps, and we've verified the lab results included." Blake opened the envelope slowly. Inside, pages of medical records, a birth certificate, and a DNA report. The blood drained from his face. What is this?" he murmured. Maya leaned over gently, her hand brushing his. Her eyes scanned the top line of the report and she froze. "Paternity test result. 0% probability of relation." Blake stared at the page like it had betrayed him. "No," he whispered. "I'm sorry," Winters said gently. "It appears Logan may not be biologically yours." Maya's breath hitched. "But he looks like you." Blake shook his head, stunned. "He has Gabrielle's nose." Her eyes. "Gabrielle listed you as the father," Winters continued. "But there are inconsistencies in her admission form. Records show she had been seeing another man unofficially during the last months of her pregnancy. Someone from her grief counseling group." Blake stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. "No," he muttered. "No, she wouldn't do that." Maya rose, moving toward him. "Blake." "I raised him," he snapped, then caught himself and lowered his voice. "I was there from the second he was born. I buried Gabrielle. I held that baby in my arms. I gave him everything." "Nothing changes that," Maya said softly. Blake covered his face with his hands. "But everything does change, doesn't it?" Detective Winters gave them a moment before clearing her throat. "There's more. We found out that Gilda may have known. She had access to the hospital's internal files. There are emails, old ones, deleted, but recoverable. She might have used the information to manipulate staff, including Maya." Maya's stomach sank. "So this wasn't just about me being the wrong skin color." "No," Winters said quietly. "It was about power. She knew the foundation was built on a secret, and she wanted to keep control." Blake dropped into the armchair, utterly deflated. "Why didn't Gabrielle tell me?" Maya didn't have an answer, only silence. Winters stood. "We're not here to destroy your life, but truth has a way of showing up even when it's unwelcome." She handed Blake a card. If you want to contest guardianship or need legal protections, call me. But I'll tell you what I've seen in my line of work. Mr. Harrington, biology doesn't make a parent. Presence does. She left quietly. The front door clicked shut behind her, leaving the house eerily still. Maya sat beside Blake, unsure what to say. He looked lost, truly lost. Do you regret it? She asked softly. What? Raising him. Loving him. All this time. He turned to her slowly. How can I regret the only thing that's ever made sense in my life? She nodded, blinking back tears. Then, that's your answer. They sat in silence for what felt like an hour. Finally, Blake spoke again. Will he ever need to know? Maya's voice trembled, but was steady. One day, when he's old enough to understand that love isn't written in blood, it's lived. Blake reached for her hand. This time, she let him. Not out of pity, but out of shared pain. And something else, something forming quietly between grief and grace. Upstairs, Logan stirred, calling for her in a sleepy voice. Maya. She rose, her hand still in Blake's for just a second longer. You're still his father, she said. That doesn't change because a paper says otherwise. And then she climbed the stairs, each step solid, steady, sacred. Blake didn't sleep that night. He sat in the den long after the lights had gone out, the soft blue glow of the fireplace flickering against the decanter of untouched bourbon on the table beside him. The paternity test report lay crumpled in his hand. Not torn, not thrown, just clenched. As if his grip could hold back the unraveling truth. Upstairs, Maya moved quietly through the hallway. She had settled Logan after his whimpering cries and now lingered just outside Blake's office. Something told her not to knock yet, not until he was ready. By morning, the air had changed again. Not like the heavy rains from days before this was the eerie calm before a different kind of storm. The estate was quiet, but not peaceful. Blake emerged just past 8 a.m., unshaven and hollow-eyed, but composed. He wore a gray cashmere sweater and dark slacks, and there was a kind of deliberate control in every movement he made. Maya stood in the kitchen, helping Logan with his cereal. When she saw Blake, her hands stilled on the spoon. Logan, sensing